All right, welcome everybody. This is SIG VMware bi-weekly meeting. Today is August 2nd, 2018, and we're gonna start with our meeting today. Steve is not here because he's on vacation this week, so I'm gonna cover for both the community updates and the active project updates. We were supposed to have a demo today. Unfortunately, it had to be canceled at the very last minute. So we were postponed that to the next meeting. Let's get started and let me share my screen so we can have the meeting notes up there. And Hui is volunteering to take notes during the meeting. All right, community updates. As we mentioned last week, well, 2 weeks ago, we wanted to probe the rest of the folks joining this call to see if there was a need to move this meeting to a different time slot. This change or this request was mostly prompted by the fact that we're now overlapping with a SIG architecture meeting, which is unfortunate because it's a very popular meeting and you know, many folks, including myself, would like to join that call as well. So I didn't want to send. I was supposed to send the poll out on Slack 2 weeks ago, but because we had the same poll out for changing cloud provider vSphere call, which we actually did, I wanted to actually wait until that poll was closed and then open a new one. So I just want to reiterate that we will send out a poll for potential new time slot for this call. Still going to be bi-weekly, but maybe change the time slot. I know it's very hard because Kubernetes meetings are all over the place. There are a couple of days that are completely cramped with meetings. And given that we want to have a decent overlap with the folks on the West Coast and the folks in Europe as well, it's this very tiny slice of the day that actually make that work. So I'll try to come up with some ideas and even give an option to keep it at the same hour, the same slot. But look for a poll coming to SIG VMware channel on Slack shortly after this meeting or tomorrow at the latest to get an update on the new potential time for this slot.
Fabio?
Yes.
Is the poll multi-option, like multi-choice?
Yeah,
okay.
I have this calendar open. It's actually in front of my eyes right now, and I'm looking at the various options. I was actually thinking maybe of moving the call against another SIG that is like something like SIG OpenStack, maybe something that maybe many people that are interested in VMware are not interested in too as well. But I will have multiple options. I'll just need to figure out at least 2 or 3 of them, and I will have an option to keep it at the same time as well.
Yeah, what I meant is, can we have multiple? Like, can we opt for multiple options?
Oh yeah, of course. You can vote for multiple. I will just, you know, in the end, I will get the one that has most votes.
Good. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, we did the same for cloud provider vSphere, and it worked out well. So it's a
Fabio, what I was going to suggest as a possibility is what Tim Pepper does with an internal SIG sync. I don't know if this would work for a regular meeting, honestly, but he tends to rotate it because of the, when Europe, China, North America all to be able to attend, and he rotates it so that it's friendly to one of those groups. But I think that's monthly, which is a little easier than rotating a bi-weekly meeting.
Yeah, unfortunately, actually, I thought about that because I think I think it's a great idea. The problem with moving a meeting that often is that there's a lot of people that are maintaining like manual calendar for the meeting, and changing the time every so often is not like easy for people to keep track of. So I kind of steered away from proposing something like that. I think, just rotating the slot like every now and then, like let's say, I think we had the slot since the very first call, which was back in March. So it's been, what, 4 months? Yeah, almost 5 months. I think it's fine if we change like every, twice a year, 3 times a year, and rotate between, maybe slots that are more favorable for Europe, slots that are more favorable for US or China. I think it's fine. But yeah, changing like every time is kind of a bit heavy on the scheduling, so to say. Okay, so that is out of the way. The next very important thing, I actually want everybody to take a look at this, is there's an updated SIG charter that is up for review in Kubernetes community. The link is already in the meeting notes. The PR is number 2300. So Steve sent this in a couple of weeks ago. We iterated a couple of times over it. I think we even sent out an email on the mailing list to ask for people for review. There are a couple of comments there, but I'm very interested in hearing feedback and even getting feedback directly on the PR if you guys want to do that, because it's very important, as this is the charter for the SIG, and it's very important because there are a lot of angles we probably didn't think of, and there might be some very valuable inputs from people that are exposed to various parts of VMware products or VMware infrastructures. So please take a look, please read it out, and if you have any suggestions, if you have any comments, please, if you're unsure if it's something that will be good to end up in a public conversation, like on a GitHub repo, feel free to reach out directly to me or Steve. But by all means, please take a look at that, because it is very important and it's fundamental for the SIG and the, I would say, the future of the SIG, even. And that's pretty much it for the community updates. I don't have much else to talk about that. I'm sure there will be some interesting things happening over the next few weeks. I see that there was a nice update on from Tim Pepper today on the community meeting on the 112 release, all the process that is moving. And I think I mentioned that last time that we have VMware is basically carrying a lot of work for 112. Tim is the release manager for 112, and we have Doug McEachran that is the branch manager for 112. I know that they cut Alpha 1. I think it was yesterday or the day before. Definitely this week. Which is, like, I think the very first time that a release, even an alpha release, was cut by somebody who is not a Google employee, which is, so there's a lot of changes, a lot of interesting things coming. Let's move on to active project update. A couple of interesting things here. You probably have seen, so last meeting we talked about Cluster API. You probably have seen an email from me on the mailing list asking for people to vote +1 on sponsoring the Cluster API provider vSphere sub-project. Let me give you a little bit of background on that. There's been some contentions on this matter here, mostly because apparently Cluster API providers have been mostly being taken care of by SIG cluster lifecycle. So there is I think there's some confusion right now, because as far as I understand, there is SIG cluster lifecycle that is owning all these provider sub-projects. So provider for OpenStack, provider for AWS, and so on and so forth. But there's also now the Cluster API working group that has graduated to a SIG. So there's now SIG Cluster API. There is SIG Cluster Lifecycle that owns sub-projects for Cluster API. And given that there's this confusion, and also because most of the folks that are interested in VMware infrastructure products, or in general, that are interested in VMware at all, are gravitating around this SIG and not necessarily other SIGs. Maybe some of them are, but not all of them. I just made a point to the steering committee that it was probably a better idea to just incubate the sub-project under SIG VMware. And eventually, once the sub-project, once the code base has grown to a point where it is considered stable, once all the situation with SIG cluster lifecycle and SIG cluster API has settled down, we can think of moving and shepherd this sub-project over to the right SIG, because we don't even know what the right SIG is right now. So this is pretty much the reason why I sent out that email, and why I'm asking for a +1 about keeping the cluster API sub-project under SIG VMware. I'm thinking about closing the voting after this meeting and report back if there are no objections. And from what I've seen in the responses so far on the mailing list, I've seen that it's pretty much everybody's agreeing on keeping it under SIG VMware. Everybody's voting a +1, and I never had anybody voting against having the project incubated in SIG VMware. So I'm just going to report back that the SIG agrees on keeping it under SIG VMware, and we will move forward with creating the repo and making it official that we are owning this new cluster API provider vSphere sub-project.
Fabio, do you want to address the issues I raised with you the other day as part of the process coming out of the SIG, or does that get addressed once you go back from the SIG? Because, I'm sure that people are, what I'm talking about.
Specifically for what?
Well, I mentioned during another call that some people raised some concerns about how the way that the vSphere cluster API implementation is being handled with respect to SIG ownership is orthogonal to the others, and it seemed to be some concerns at the steering committee level, and I didn't know if that was something that should be addressed before the SIG makes a recommendation or ahead of that. Or sorry, after.
Ideally, it's what I was talking about before is basically we're trying to understand if the SIG agrees on keeping or creating the sub-project under SIG VMware, which was the intention of the email I sent out last week. And from what I've seen, the SIG has been positive, so everybody's responded with a +1. I haven't got any -1 in keeping in having cluster API provider vSphere under SIG VMware, which is pretty much what the steering committee wanted us to ask the SIG if this was something that people wanted or not. And
okay. This
is what I will be reporting back to the SIG, unless somebody has a different opinion, and I will happily hear those opinions right now if you guys want. But from my understanding here, this is just purely a matter of governance, and I know that they have some concerns about like recreating the old problem where we had a sprawl of SIGs just to look after a tiny piece of code. This wouldn't be the case because we have a SIG established already, and we're just owning that, and we're just basically incubating the sub-project in order to make it grow to a certain point, and then hand it over to the right SIG. Because again, I think this is another problem where if we end up start working on this and under the wrong SIG, we're going to fragment, and then we're going to have another reorganization, because if there's a SIG cluster lifecycle, and SIG cluster lifecycle will not own cluster API anymore because there's a SIG cluster API now. It's just kind of a mess right now, and I think the best way to incubate, given the cluster API itself is a very young project inside Kubernetes community, I think it's the right way to go forward. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Awesome. Okay. What else? So we have a new time slot for Cloud Provider vSphere Sync Up. If you guys haven't seen, there was some confusion about the calendar invitation for whatever reason. I made sure to update the community calendar, but apparently the invitation that I've sent weeks back didn't work anymore, wasn't updated. So I'm gonna just keep, I've sent the updated invitation again yesterday, I think, or the day before. So you guys, if you're subscribed to the mailing list, you should have the right calendar invitation. If not, the meeting is on Wednesday, just like it was before, but it's no longer at 2 p.m. Pacific. It's now at 9 a.m. Pacific, which is 6 p.m. Central European. And it's, I don't know about, I just know about 2 time zones at a time. I'm sorry, but you guys can make up the change for your own time zone. But you know, it's a time slot that works for both the West Coast and Europe, so we should be good. And it's every other Wednesday. So we had the first meeting with the new time schedule on Wednesday, August 1st. We're going to have the next one on August 15th. And good news from the repo as well. So Kubernetes / Cloud Provider vSphere. We have 2 major updates since the last time. We now have a CCM that is working. CCM is the core of the, basically the cloud controlling manager, the cloud provider itself. We now have a CCM that is in working condition and it can be deployed. We also have some documentation. We have manifest to deploy that CCM with the correct RBAC roles and everything. Thanks, David, for that work. This is something that you guys can go out and test. Again, if you have some spare cycles to test it out in your own vSphere environment, please do, because we're looking for people testing it out, testing like adding nodes, removing nodes, shutting down nodes under like using vSphere while Kubernetes is working to see if they report back correctly. Kind of test it out as much as you can. And if you're finding some of the code that is you feel like it's wrong or it's not optimal, there's a lot of optimization, a lot of even low-hanging fruit in the code base. If you guys want to check it out, or if you want to contribute, picking up some of the issues that are open already in the repo, please do. Some of them have been assigned already. Some of them have help wanted. The help wanted tag, those are the best to pick up. So please go check it out and try it, contribute. Please help us out in making this the best way to run Kubernetes on vSphere. Also, major thanks to Hui that helped out in getting CI off the ground for the repo. We now have CI automation enabled, which is great. So right now, if you're sending a PR to Cloud Provider vSphere, you're gonna get tested, using Tide and Prow. I think we're running a single test right now. I think we're running make test target, and Hui, keep me honest if I'm not correct here. But I think we're running make test, and if you're feeling like you want to add some tests to the code base, this will be run using the test target of the make file. Is that correct, Hui? Is that running make test?
You are correct.
Okay. So if you want to hook into the CI and add some tests to be run, make test is the make file target you should look at.
To be clear, I wanted to add. So make tests is not itself a test, like Fabio said. It's just a target. It is also currently tied to what are referred to as unit tests. Mm-hmm. Please do not go go create end-to-end tests if you wish. That'd be great. Add conformance tests. But do not tie them to make test. Make test at the moment is going to be tied to unit testing only, pre-submit, what would be considered pre-submit blocking unit tests. I haven't discussed it with you, Fabio, but we'd like to probably have some discrete targets that indicate each test suite type, even if we do end up with some end-to-end tests that are pre-submit tests because they might use the simulator. I still think that we want those to be separate targets. So for now, I would recommend to treat make test as unit tests and do not tie any non-unit tests to that.
Thanks for that.
That's true. I think once we need the end-to-end test or other test type, we need to add another job. And this particular job is for pre-submit unit test.
Well, yes, but that's the case. However, you could tie end-to-end tests to make tests, right? And that job would run those tests, the existing job. That's why I wasn't referring to the job queue, but the actual make target, because that's what the job is running. So that's why I'm saying, please do not tie any, at the moment, non-unit tests to make tests. And then I'll work with Fabio. He and I will work with Fabio with the CI group, and then maybe come up with a standard pattern. Maybe make tests. I don't think it should ever do anything that requires external dependencies, so we want discrete targets for that.
Yeah, sounds good. And speaking of which, Andrew, do you have an update on the potential working group for cloud provider testing?
Yeah, I actually met with Aaron Krickenberger, SIG testing this morning. I had some updates there, more pushing forward on getting conformance testing working with the cloud provider. So we're trailblazing apparently. One of the issues of SIG testing is there are a lot of voices. And they usually say, well, I think, and then they say a thing. When you start breaking it down, some people had they thought something was the case and necessarily wasn't, or wasn't necessarily the case. So we'll be brand new in terms of wanting to run tests in an external cluster. So I brought up again the idea of forming a working group, and there seems to be like, yeah, but no real eagerness behind it. I think it's because SIG testing doesn't think that anything that we are suggesting is that unique or interesting. And I think I agree with them. I think the most thing that could be considered unique and interesting is when I brought up the idea of running these jobs in our cluster, the proud jobs in our cluster. Currently, I did get to the bottom of this. No one has anything set up where they've got an external Kubernetes cluster that the singular instance is scheduling workloads on. We would be the first. And we discussed some alternatives to that to get us off the ground more quickly. So I could see building a working group around that out of SIG testing. But when I brought that up with Aaron, it's like, yeah, I think they're very, very busy and they've got a lot of work on their plate. And we may need to get people other than SIG testing to make this a priority if we want to do that. And you know what? I'll prepare something that explains that and why that could be important for cloud providers for the next meeting.
Yeah, and I think this may be worth discussing at SIG Cloud Provider, because I guess with this new push for out-of-tree providers, it will be very interesting for people working on different cloud providers and how to get the same type of integration. I guess that most cloud providers will want to run and be a signal for CI in Kubernetes, not necessarily a blocking signal, but at least.
Yeah, we won't be blocking the release. And to be clear, as he said, you can use Travis CI, you can use any CI you want and still use Tide. It's just that it won't go through Prowl, and you could still put the results up on Google Storage, but I'm pushing for tight integration with their existing system as opposed to everybody all going off and doing their own thing. What I would like to see is Red Hat, others, OpenStack, bring up a publicly accessible Kubernetes endpoint and then be able to have their Prowl system schedule our tests on our clusters. and he says no one is doing that yet. So we may be the first. I volunteered today to do some extensions to kube tests for a compromise approach. So I've been looking at that.
Cool.
But yeah, it would be a unique situation. Right now, if I were to put a suggestion forward to the cloud providers, it would be to take the approach similar to OpenStack, where they've got their own CI running tests, and then uploading the results to the Google bucket that is monitored by TestGrid.
Mhm.
And they still have tied integration, but they're using their own CI against their repo, which again, they're rolling their own, and really we want to be able to integrate into the singular Prowl instance.
Yeah, and I think it might be, worth to explore, making this somehow standardized, like, a standardized way to interact or
That's true.
branch out from the Prowl installation in a consistent manner. And
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think that's right. I think, even if we have to use our own CI, like, here's how you use your own CI. The issue I brought up with Aaron this morning that was a big deal to me is, you speak of signal. I'm not even talking about blocking signal. I'm talking about build signal.
Yep.
We would not be receiving the signal that, something has changed, or a test would need to occur. And all that is handled with Prowl with the way they do the labels. And so these other CI systems aren't necessarily built to work the way Prowl works. And so I told them it's very important that people working on these out-of-tree providers are using the same workflow to which they're accustomed from working on KK. And, we want to be able to get to where it feels exactly the same.
Yeah. No, good point. I mean, it's already a very, confusing experience being like a first-time contributor to Kubernetes. All the process and contributing on KK. I'm talking about that, and all the process, all the tags. Dealing with the bots and everything, and having the same consistent experience across all the repo will be beneficial for people that want to contribute to multiple Kubernetes repos, especially
Exactly.
since KK is narrowing its scope to become just core. So I will anticipate having more and more, external repo under Kubernetes, but still external repo to KK for things that will be expanded using CRDs. New functionality will probably not be merged into KK, but will be merged into new repos.
Exactly. So yeah, I'll come back with a tighter update for next time.
Cool. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, that was all for the active projects update. I have a couple of items on the agenda for discussion. I think something popped up during the meeting as well. So I think we mentioned last time that we had kind of a critical fix, bug fix for the in-tree vSphere cloud provider. I think that the original fix wasn't cherry-picked for 1.11.1. Like it slipped because it was like merged like a day later or something. And I think it was cherry-picked for 1.11.2, which is due August 7th. At least this information is what I got from the community meeting right before this one. I don't know if anyone in the call, like Doug or anybody else, has any further information on. I remember this being the VMUID bug that was affecting everybody on 1.11 for vSphere Cloud Provider. Not sure if anybody has more information on this, but it should be in 1.11.2. Anyone?
Yeah, I thought it was only an issue if the persistent connection to vCenter was lost, and to me it looked like the issue had actually always been there since the code was added to handle that case. But I could be wrong. But yeah, it's also been cherry picked to the 110 branch, so it'll be in 110.6, I think is the next one, or 7.
I'm asking because I'm saying it's critical because I've seen a lot of bug reports coming in with the same problem, like from various sources, like looking at Slack or looking at some of the chats I've seen. Like multiple people reporting back with specifically 1.11 like this issue. I'm not sure if something has changed, maybe in the way the cloud provider code is called from within Kubernetes. But for some reason, it seems like it popped up like more frequently than before. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but it seemed like it was an issue that many people faced in 1.11, or maybe it was just like more people started using Kubernetes with vSphere with 1.11, maybe. But yeah, okay, that's great to hear that is being cherry picked for 1.11 too. So we're gonna have that there.
Fabio, on that note, I had a question about that. Is there an effort to, while we're making contributions to the out-of-tree cloud provider, to keep everything that we're doing, at least filing patches for the in-tree, or is that just an as-needed basis? I just wanted to understand what the idea was, or the current thinking is in terms of keeping those in sync as much as possible, if people think that at all.
It's more like done as a as-needed basis. There's no effort in keeping them in sync. There is definitely an effort in keeping them in at feature parity. So we want to have them at feature parity for the time being, at least. And this includes things like the zones support and so on. But when it comes to patches and things like that, the idea here is to just patch or backport a fix from from the in-tree to out-of-tree and vice versa on an as-needed basis.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's great. I see that we have an update on the VCP zones and demo. Michael and Jaiton, do you guys want to?
Yeah, just briefly from my side, because Jitong will give the demo and some more details on how it's implemented. But I had a call last week with Hannes from Pivotal, just to make sure that we're not breaking anything related to Bosch or other systems kind of currently addressing this zones, the lack of zones in the cloud provider with other means. And so it looks pretty straightforward for the Bosch CPI for vSphere, that we actually can remove some code that's in there to make zones work, and just use the VCP implementation then, as well as improve some documentation on the Bosch side. So according to Hannes, the feedback was pretty positive. And I don't know, Hannes is in the call, so if Hannes, you want to comment on something?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, cool.
So I think the wording is a bit wrong. The Bosch CPI is a thing we, I guess, don't have to touch in any way. We might need to update the CFCR release, which should be easy. We just need to make sure we do it at the right time. So there needs to be some alignment on, I don't know, the release schedule of this code and the CFCR release schedule. But that should be easy. Updating docs should be also easy. If it turns out there is work needed on the Bosch CPI or Bosch itself, that's probably going to be harder. But I guess we will make it happen in some way or the other. But to summarize, I think it's all doable with the minimum amount of work and alignment between, let's say, CFCR and VCP. So that's great.
Thanks, Hannes.
Awesome to hear. Jaiton, do you have a demo for us?
Yeah. So I know some of you attended the CrossView meeting last week, but some of you may not. So let me do a quick introduction on this zones implementation. So can I share my screen now?
You should have the ability to share your screen now.
Okay. So my screen. Yeah. Can you see? Oh, sorry. Can you see my screen now?
Yep.
Okay, so this is the open issue. I have linked this issue in the Google Docs. You can see that. So for now, the zones implementation, we plan to tagging make the tagging to apply on the host level. So it means that the same host equals to the same zone. And there is a VM, the runtime, the summary, the host can help us to detect drift of the VMs. And so we want to make this feature as simple as possible. So it's basically an opt-in feature. So in the VCP configuration file, we only add one more field in this, which is the labels field. And there are two properties, zone and the region here. And these one are the tag categories in your own vCenter server. Okay, so I have a quick demo here. So you may also need to sync up the most updated Go vMommy master repo and to have the tags API installed in order to use this feature. Okay, so this one, I'm just using the tags API to list my tags categories in vCenter and also the tags. So which means that, okay, I want to use the K8s.io region and K8s.io zone as the region and zone in Kubernetes node labels. And the tags here, C8S and US West will be the zone and the region. Okay, so and the middle is the VCP configuration file. So I'm now adding. Well, let's do it quick. Okay, so I'm adding the two new property here, zone and region, which equals to the tag categories I have just listed. And in the right, okay, in the right window, I will start a cluster here. Okay, let's do it quick. Start. Okay, for now you can see that cluster is up, and now you, if you type the kubectl get nodes command, you will have the region and zone available here. And I also have some error checking and error handling for this. So if users mistype or make some mistake about the regions or zones here, like in my case, okay, the user typed KS region, but actually it should be KSIO region. So for this condition, okay, when I up the cluster, you will see that it will return an error. So the kubelet will terminate. So in this case, you may want to check the log to see what happened. So, and because this is an opt-in feature, so you can totally leave this field empty. So as in this case, okay, so you don't want to use the zones feature, okay, and you just leave this field empty, and then you started the cluster. It's okay, cluster is up, and you will get nodes show labels, and there will not be zones support. Okay, yeah, yeah. So this is the demo, yeah. And anyone has some questions for this?
This is great. That was an awesome demo. Thanks for this amount of work. I just wanted to point out that Jaitong actually contributed upstream to Go vMommy first for the tagging feature. So he implemented the tagging API for vSphere, which was an interesting body of work on its own, and then proceeded to implement this. And it's great effort. Thanks.
Thanks. Thank you, Fabio. Oh, and also there's a PR I have read it for this, and the PR is in review. Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, this will will take some time to get merged because it also requires Kubernetes to vendor a new version of Go vMommy.
Yeah.
Which is always something, vendoring new code is always something that is very scrutinized for a reason, for a very good reason. And so it's going to take you some time because we have to render that first, and then
Mhm.
the PR will have to merge with the new functionality. Any questions for Jaitan? All right, we're at the end of the agenda here. Given that we have another almost 20 minutes left, I just want to open up the floor for any questions that are not on the agenda, or even something that we discussed today or last time. If you guys have any questions, please come on now. Otherwise, if there is nothing, we can wrap up.
Hey, we were talking about testing earlier.
Mhm.
And I was thinking about putting together some kind of overview for VC SIM geared towards, cloud Kubernetes, both the in-tree and out-of-tree developers that are working on that. So the question would be, if I were to do that, would be the right audience, like this meeting, or maybe the cloud provider, vSphere cloud provider working group?
Yeah, probably.
I would.
Sorry, for a more in-depth discussion, probably cloud provider vSphere, but I think it's actually worth to have something like that done here because it's like a wider audience. Maybe people are interested on this also outside potentially the strictly Kubernetes repo.
Yeah, I was going to suggest attending the CI/CD weekly that I've posted about, because that was the VC SIM was a topic that came up or I raised a few weeks ago. Right now we're using VC SIM in and out of tree to do unit tests, but SIG testing has indicated they have no real issues using a fake mock or simulator to do end-to-end testing, to keep it portable, essentially, so it doesn't have any external dependencies or external secrets that it's required. And if the cloud provider can actually use VC SIM to satisfy end-to-end tests, then we would be able to produce end-to-end pre-submit blocking tests, which would increase our confidence that once we were to do some type of end-to-end feature test on a real vCenter, that it should work without issue, hopefully. But of course, we want to make sure that we wouldn't be introducing any false positives. I will say at this very moment, it's being used to execute all of the entry unit tests. So I have to imagine that it is capable somewhat of satisfying the cloud provider, at least to some extent.
Yeah, no, it is. I think there's some percentage of the tests that are using it. There were some tests that would look at environment variables, and if you had set vSphere, vCenter IP, whatever the names were, that would actually run the test against a real vCenter. And some of those have been changed to, if the environment variables are not set, then run it against the simulator. So that kind of thing, where we could potentially have tests that could run against both. But there's definitely a lot of code that is just not covered at all by unit tests, and probably the same case would probably go for the end-to-end tests.
Yeah,
Well, if you ask me, having VC SIM to cover 100% of our testing will be the best thing ever. Also because it, as Andrew was pointing out, it's portable, and it will probably fit great within the testing framework of Kubernetes. We won't have the problem of having a live system to test against. And if we need to test it against a live system, we can still drop in, as I said, an environment variable or something, and just point the test against a real live system. So,
well, what I imagine I think I mentioned it, would be something like having the pre-submit end-to-end tests. And I see the point of the variable, so that it basically would be the same tests. That'd be a good idea. But then it wouldn't preclude having the feature tests. That would be post-submit, maybe on a nightly basis, so that they could catch something before we decided to do some type of release. And the reason that I say that is because the feature tests would likely require standing up the a virtual vCenter, which would take a bit, and we don't want to block PRs. So I have no problem doubling the tests that are essentially the same tests and making the simulator sort of the first pass. I just want to make sure that we're not potentially introducing false positives, that some failed test isn't specific to the simulator. So I think we'd want great confidence that these end-to-end tests with the simulator aren't introducing false positives before we enable them as blocking.
Fair point.
I mean, again, they are all unit tests all of our unit tests that need vCenter at the moment, entry use the simulator. So there's that. But I don't know to what extent they work because they're specific and can be specific versus if you just tell Kubernetes to configure the cloud provider and point it at the simulator. I don't know, the distance between those two and what that might introduce.
But going back to your original question, Doug, I think it will be probably something we can have during the Cloud Provider vSphere call, but also maybe have like a demo or like a big slot on this call, maybe next time or the time after, where you go over all the details of the system. I think vSystem is extremely powerful, and I love it as a tool. I think the problem is that not many people know about it. So it would be great just to spread the word about it.
Doug, how about you and I get together and maybe write an end-to-end test using it and demo something like that, or you can. I was going to offer to help, but maybe see if we can't get an end-to-end test actually working using the simulator.
Sure. I mean, we could even do we could do some live coding with Zoom.
Oh yeah, that sounds so fun. Oh man.
Cool. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Has anyone ever tried configuring the cloud provider and pointing it at the simulator, or is it like Fabio said, it's just not well known enough that people even thought about it?
I have not done it, but I'm planning to do that in the next day or two, because there was an issue that came up where basically they had multiple vCenters without shared storage. So just using it to look at that use case. There are some methods that where we might need to add support to the simulator. So one of them, for example, is there's a separate API endpoint for storage, SPVM storage, policy-based management. So that's one gap that we need to fill. But I'm not sure if that's actually called until you create a volume or not. But I'll try it out and see what happens.
Great.
Awesome. All right. Any other questions?
So I want to bring up a question around the cluster API provider for vSphere implementation. So two things, like today, first of all, like the Git repository, I guess, Fabio, you mentioned there's something related to the SIG that is happening to land the Git repository in a proper place, which is, I think, in under the Kubernetes SIGs URL there. So that probably might be happening. But that's just one thing. The second part, essentially more importantly, is the implementation side of it. So today, for example, the current implementation uses, let's say, Terraform in combination with shell scripts to kind of get it running. So my first instinct was, what is the motivation here to actually move away from Terraform and maybe use Go vMommy so that we can have much more tighter control and over the entire process, and we can probably leverage a lot more vSphere related features directly, since we're directly going to talk to vSphere APIs rather than depending upon the Terraform vSphere provider to kind of catch up with anything that we might want to use. So what are the thoughts on that?
You raised this in K8 Contrib the other day, and I thought that I think it was you that raised it. I thought that I answered it there, but I'll repeat. We are to my knowledge, it's Loke's project, but it's planning to be refactored. It's just what somebody else did. So I don't know. Was the answer? Did I misstate something there? But the plan is to refactor it.
Right. I mean, I get the plan. I mean, essentially, so one is if you were to get started with it. I mean, so right now, I mean, let's say for example, I mean, I'm more than happy to like kickstart some of that refactoring. But what I do not know is, I mean, do we start refactoring on the current repository where it is? I mean, how do we kind of get the ball rolling there?
So as far as that, the thing here is that we're waiting for the proper repository is not created yet, which is, basically the update I gave at the beginning is exactly that. Like before we can actually get started in the right place with the right, tools to actually get this cluster API provider vSphere out of the door, we need to have the repo first set up. And in order to have the repo set up, we need to justify somebody owning it. And that somebody is SIG VMware in this case. So I will reach out to steering committee after this call or tomorrow at the latest and give them the answer that, the voting has been closed and that, potentially SIG VMware will be hosting this sub-project for cluster API provider vSphere. And once that is done, they will go on and create the repo for us. Once that is created, we can start actually, submitting code to that. So Lok Nguyen, he has volunteered to step up and lead this project and be the technical lead for the sub-project. So I know he is looking into and he's in contact with the cluster API folks. Keep in mind that the entire cluster API effort is very early, and there's a lot of refactoring happening in cluster API itself. So lots of API changes, lots of continuous churn on cluster API itself. So I wouldn't be surprised if progress right now is going to be very slow because things are not set in stone. I mean, right now there's only one provider that works in a sense that it can actually provision and potentially even delete nodes, which is OpenStack. No one else has any real working implementation. It's just stubs and half-baked implementations, just like the vSphere one, which is using Terraform. I mean, it's basically just like a shim layer on top of Terraform. So as far as the timeline goes, I think next week is going to be the week where we actually get something done with Cluster API in regards of creating the repo and start having a place where we can actually contribute code to. I don't think right now there's anything specific except for making sure that all the ducks are in line when it comes to governance for the sub-project. Does that make any sense?
Yep, absolutely.
Cool.
Hey, this is Giri. So I have one question regarding the simulator that you guys were talking about. Not sure if I missed that. So what is the motivation behind using a simulator as opposed to a real one? Is it the resource or is it a speed at which you could deploy vCenter?
So for tests, there are rules with Kubernetes end-to-end tests, and that's actually a good idea to revisit those rules, whether they mean the same thing for out-of-tree providers. I don't think they actually care what we do, but I'm going to go with the current rules. Currently, right now, end-to-end tests have time limits to which they ask you to adhere. Standing up a vCenter at which to execute these tests is not a speedy thing. Conservatively, it seems to take between 15 and 20 minutes. And at least the existing end-to-end tests in tree, as they are written today, and obviously they can be rewritten for the out-of-tree provider, they assume that you own that vCenter and have full access to it. One, our environment is on VMC, so we don't have full access to the control plane vCenter. But two, even if we did, we don't want it to mutate it beyond use. We don't want to destroy our control plane. So the two options there are to refactor tests so that they operate in a partitioned manner, or to provide a virtual vCenter on which to deploy a vSphere cluster on which to deploy Kubernetes. And again, doing that, it's just a matter of time. So if ideally, if you could put down a virtual vSphere cluster and Kubernetes on top of it in 2 minutes and run all of the feature tests against it in another 2 minutes, I would be in favor of making that a PR. It's called a pre-submit blocking job. So literally it was doing complete end-to-end tests. But that's not really possible right now. So if you can use the simulator to do that so that you have a sense of confidence ahead of merging a PR, and then have some type of nightly job that kicks off against real simulators, or even post-submit. So every time you do a merge, it runs it against a real one.
Okay.
Hopefully.
That answers. So actually, from VMware, myself and Siddharth, we worked on a hackathon project. So this is actually exact use case that we were trying to showcase as part of the hackathon event, which is how you can deploy the vSphere with ESX and all of them in a matter of few seconds. We were leveraging the instant clone and NSX to achieve this. But
I would love to chat with you directly about that.
Sure, I think this is a very good use case for what we were trying to build.
Yeah, that would be great. And do remember, we are operating on VMC,
Sure.
so we lack access to data centers in a traditional sense. We have to use the content catalog.
Yeah, we can use a compute cluster for that. Yeah, maybe we can chat offline on this one.
Yeah, I just posted my email and everyone.
Okay, thanks.
Awesome. Great that we made a connection here.
I felt a spark.
All right, we have 2 minutes left, so we ended up taking the full hour. So you guys have any like short questions, sort of last minute question? Otherwise, we can wrap up. All right, going once, going twice. All right, everybody. See you in 2 weeks.
See you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.